The bus smelled like old vinyl and diesel fuel, and the particular kind of exhaustion that only comes from a city that never quite sleeps, but never quite wakes up either. Nashville in November had a specific texture to it. The air was cold enough to bite, but not cold enough to be beautiful. And the streets outside the windows of Route 12 were slick with a rain that had been threatening all evening and finally made good on its promise sometime around 9 o'clock. Danny Calloway gripped the steering wheel with both hands and watched the road, the way a man watches something he's done so many times it no longer requires thought, only presence. He was 44 years old, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested he'd once been stronger, with a jawline that hadn't quite surrendered to age, and eyes the color of creek water. Not quite green, not quite brown, the kind of color that changes depending on the light and the mood. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow from a night he didn't talk about anymore, and hands that were slightly too large for a man his size, the kind of hands that looked like they were built for something other than a steering wheel. The route had been dead since 8:30. A Tuesday night in early November, the kind of night when Nashville's tourists had already gone back to their hotels, and the locals had already gone back to their living rooms, and the city settled into itself like an old dog circling before sleep. Danny had made the full loop of Route 12 twice in the last hour with exactly 3 passengers. A woman in scrubs who fell asleep before the 3rd stop and woke up 3 stops past hers. An old man who smelled like pipe tobacco and thanked Danny twice when he got off. And a teenage girl who spent the entire ride with her face buried in her phone and didn't look up once. Now the bus was empty, or at least Danny thought it was empty. He checked his mirrors out of habit, the wide rectangular rear view that gave him a view of the whole cabin. 42 seats in 4 neat rows under fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency just slightly above silence. The seats were mostly dark blue, worn to a lighter shade at the headrests from years of passengers leaning back and closing their eyes and thinking about whatever it is people think about on public buses at night. A candy wrapper on the floor near the middle door, a forgotten umbrella hooked over a seat back in the 3rd row, and at the very back, half hidden in the shadow where the overhead light had been flickering for 3 weeks, despite Danny's maintenance requests, a figure. Danny squinted. A man, sitting in the last row, right side, next to the window, hat pulled down, one of those cream-colored resistal straws that you see all over Nashville, but that somehow look different on some people, look like they belong in a way that's hard to explain. Jacket that was either brown or dark green in the bad light. Shoulders that suggested a man who had been large once and had simply stayed that way. Not threatening, just present, still. The way a person sits when they are somewhere in their own head, and the outside world is just background noise. Danny turned his eyes back to the road. He hadn't noticed the man get on. That bothered him slightly, not from any sense of danger, but from professional pride. Danny Calloway knew his passengers. It was one of the things he took seriously about a job that most people in his life had, at various points, suggested he should feel embarrassed about. His brother Kevin thought he was wasting himself. His ex-wife Carol had stopped short of saying it directly, but had made the feeling clear in the way she looked at him sometimes. That particular look that was half pity and half frustration. The look that says, "I thought you were going somewhere." His daughter Reese, who was 19 and studying music at Belmont University on a partial scholarship that Danny made up the difference for every semester, never said anything about it at all, which was somehow worse. But Danny knew his route. He knew the regulars by face and by habit. He knew that the woman in scrubs, her name was Patricia Dunn. She worked night shifts at Vanderbilt and always got on at the medical center stop and almost always fell asleep. He knew she liked the window seat on the left side and always had a small insulated lunch bag that she held on her lap instead of putting on the seat beside her. He knew the old man's name was Gerald Hofstetter, retired from the post office, and now apparently with nowhere in particular to go and all the time in the world to get there. He knew the teenager hadn't been on his route before. Visitors, probably. Or maybe a kid who'd missed her usual bus. He didn't know the man in the back. He checked the mirror again. The man hadn't moved, wasn't on his phone, wasn't reading. Just sitting, watching the rain streak across the window beside him in long diagonal lines, the city lights outside turning the water on the glass into something that looked almost like neon. Danny decided the man was fine, made a mental note to check his ticket when he got a chance, and turned his attention back to the road. The last stop before the depot was at the corner of Division and 12th, a block and a half from the Gulch, where Nashville's older bones showed through its newer skin, converted warehouses and coffee shops, and a mural of a guitar 3 stories tall on the side of a building that used to be a textile factory. Danny pulled to the stop, opened the doors, waited the standard 30 seconds. No one got on. No one got off. He closed the doors and pulled back into the street. 3 more miles to the depot. This was Danny's favorite part of the shift. Always had been, even back in the beginning when he'd first taken the job 11 years ago and told himself it was temporary, just something to keep the lights on while he figured out the next move. The last stretch before the depot, when the route was done and the passengers were gone, and it was just him and the empty bus and the city outside the windows, lit up and streaming past like a film he'd seen 100 times but didn't mind watching again. This was when he sang. He didn't think of it as performance. It wasn't even really conscious, most nights. It was more like the singing happened the same way breathing happened. Just a thing his body did when the conditions were right. He'd been singing since he was 8 years old, in the back of his father's pickup truck on the way to church in Gallatin, 30 miles northeast of Nashville. A small boy with a voice that was already too big for his body, already reaching for something that the other kids in the choir didn't seem to feel the same way. His father, Robert Calloway, a mechanic with rough hands and a baritone that could rattle the windows at First Baptist, had told him once, just once, in the way that men like Robert Calloway said important things, quickly and without looking at you, that Danny had a gift. He'd spent the better part of 30 years trying to figure out what to do with it, and the last 11 years pretending he'd made his peace with the answer. He started low, the way he always did. Just the melody, no words yet, letting the tune find its shape in the space of the bus, the way you let your eyes adjust to a dark room, the hum of the engine underneath, the rhythm of the wipers, the rain. It all became a kind of accompaniment, unintentional and perfect. Then the words came. Baby, come on, let me show you what it's all about. George Strait. Run. One of the later ones, from 2001, from the album The Road Less Traveled, not the song most people thought of first when they thought of George Strait, not Amarillo by Morning or Oceanfront Property or Check Yes or No, but a song that Danny had always loved with a specific and private intensity. There was something in it, the urgency of it, the way it moved, the way the narrator was essentially begging someone to choose life, to run towards something instead of away from everything. Danny had listened to it approximately 10,000 times in his life, and it still did something to him in the chest, still moved something that most things couldn't reach anymore. He sang it the way he sang everything when he was alone, completely, without the guardedness that living in the world requires, without the small protective layer that people keep between themselves and their own emotions. His voice filled the bus, bounced off the windows and the vinyl seats and the metal handrails, and if there was no one to hear it, that was fine. That had always been fine. That was the deal he'd made with himself. Run! To me, darlin'! Run! He didn't see the man in the back seat slowly lift his head. He didn't see the hat tilt back slightly, revealing a face that, had the light been better, had Danny been looking, would have been recognizable to most of America and virtually every person in Nashville. He didn't see the man go very still in the way that people go still when they hear something that stops them. Danny just sang. His voice was a baritone, warm and a little rough around the edges, with a natural vibrato that he'd never been taught and couldn't have explained if asked. It had the quality of something weathered, not damaged, but lived in, the way old wood has a quality that new wood can't replicate. There was phrasing in it, real phrasing, the kind of instinctive musicianship that can't be manufactured in a studio or developed in a class, the kind that comes from years of listening and absorbing and loving music with a seriousness that has nothing to do with career and everything to do with devotion. He got through the first chorus and into the second verse, and by then he'd forgotten entirely about the passenger in the back, if he'd been thinking about him at all. Because this was the thing about singing for Danny. It evacuated everything else. The worry about Reese's tuition for the spring semester. The sound of Carol's voice on the phone last week, not angry anymore. Just tired in a way that was somehow harder to take than the anger. The look on his supervisor Bill Granger's face when Danny had filed the maintenance request for the third time about the flickering light. And Granger had said, "I'll look into it," in the tone that means, "I will not look into it." The persistent low-grade awareness that his life had not gone the way he'd intended. A feeling he carried the way some people carry a stone in their shoe. Not debilitating, but constant. A small, continuous discomfort that you eventually stop noticing, and then one day realize you've been walking wrong for years. All of it disappeared when he sang. He was into the bridge when he caught something in the rearview mirror. Not a movement exactly, more a quality of attention. The man in the back was no longer watching the window. He was watching Danny. Danny felt it before he consciously processed it. That particular prickling awareness of being observed. His voice didn't falter, but something in him shifted, the way a bird shifts on a wire without taking flight. He finished the phrase, let the last note settle into the air of the bus, and then let the song go quiet. He cleared his throat. "Sorry about that," he said, looking at the mirror with the slight embarrassment of a man who has been caught doing something private. "Didn't realize I still had a passenger. You should have said something. I would have, Don't apologize," the man in the back said. His voice was low and even, with a South Texas cadence that had smoothed out over decades but never entirely disappeared. The particular flatness of the coastal plains. The unhurried delivery of a man who had never felt the need to fill silence just for the sake of it. Danny frowned slightly at the mirror. Something about the voice was familiar in a way that he couldn't place. The way a smell will remind you of something you can't quite name. "Long shift," Danny offered, the standard small talk of a man who makes small talk for a living. "Long enough," the man said. A pause. "How long you been driving this route?" 11 years. 11 years. Another pause, the comfortable kind, not awkward. "You sing like that every night?" Danny almost said no. It was his first instinct. The deflection, the diminishment, the quick self-deprecating laugh that men like Danny deploy whenever someone gets too close to something real. "Oh, I just mess around. Nothing serious. Just a way to pass the time." He'd said versions of that sentence so many times in his life that it had become a reflex. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the straightforwardness of the question, the complete absence of mockery in it. Maybe it was the lateness of the hour and the rain, and the fact that it was the kind of night when the usual defenses feel unnecessary, like carrying an umbrella inside. "Most nights," he said, "when it's empty." "Thought it was empty," the man said simply. Danny laughed, a short, genuine laugh. "Yeah, me too." He was turning onto the access road that led to the depot when the man leaned forward into the light, and Danny looked in the mirror again. And this time, the light was right, and the angle was right, and the hat was back far enough. And Danny Calloway, who had been a country music fan for his entire conscious life, who had grown up listening to the radio in his father's garage and memorized every lyric on every album released between 1980 and 2005, who had at various points in his youth genuinely considered this man's voice to be the gold standard against which all other country voices should be measured. Danny Calloway realized who was sitting in the back of his bus. The bus drifted slightly to the left. He corrected it. "Sir," he said, and his own voice came out strange. Not starstruck exactly, because Danny was 44 years old and not given to that kind of thing, but something adjacent to it, something that was closer to profound disorientation. "Are you George Strait?" the man said. Not like an announcement, like an answer to a question that had been asked politely. "Yes." Danny stared at the road ahead and said nothing for a full 5 seconds. "You've been back there the whole time," he finally said. "Since Division Street." "That's," Danny calculated, "that's 6 stops." "I know. Why didn't you—" He stopped. Started again. "There are cabs. There are apps now. You can get a car in." "I know that too," George Strait said. "I wasn't ready to be somewhere yet. Sometimes you just need to be in between." Danny absorbed that. He pulled into the depot lot slowly, the gravel wet and gleaming under the sodium lights, and brought the bus to a stop with the particular gentleness that 11 years of practice had made second nature. He set the brake. He turned off the wipers. The rain drummed on the roof. He turned in his seat, for the first time putting his full attention on the man in the back row. George Strait looked exactly like George Strait, older than the album covers Danny had grown up with, but unmistakably himself, with that quality of physical stillness that belonged specifically to him, as if the world moved around him at a slightly different speed. He was looking at Danny with a directness that was not unkind, the frank appraisal of a man who has spent 60 years trusting his own instincts about people. "That was a good run," George Strait said. Danny didn't know what to say to that. He said, "Thank you." "How come you're driving a bus?" It wasn't the question Danny expected. He'd expected something softer, something that allowed for the usual evasions. The directness of it landed like a hand on a table. "Life," Danny said, which was the truest short answer he had. George Strait nodded slowly, as if that was an answer he recognized. "You have a card?" he said. "A number I can reach you at?" Danny blinked. Yes, sure." He patted his jacket pocket with the automatic motion of a man who has learned to always keep a business card somewhere, a habit left over from a decade-ago version of his life when he'd thought business cards mattered, when he'd thought a lot of things mattered that had turned out not to. He found one. It was for the transit authority, his name and his employee number, and a general contact line, and walked it back to the last row. George Strait took it, looked at it briefly, folded it once, and put it in his inside jacket pocket. "I'll be in touch," he said. He stood up, and he was taller than Danny expected, filling the aisle the way a man fills a room, and he moved toward the front of the bus with an unhurried ease that was somehow both completely ordinary and unmistakably not. He stepped down through the front doors into the wet gravel of the depot lot. At the bottom of the steps, he paused and looked back up at Danny. "Don't stop singing," he said. Then he walked across the lot toward a black SUV idling near the fence. Danny hadn't noticed it there before, and the door opened from inside and he got in. and the SUV moved out of the lot with quiet authority and turned onto the service road and was gone. Danny stood at the top of the bus steps in the open door, the rain coming in sideways and hitting him on the left side of his face, and stood there for a long time. He didn't tell anyone. That was the first decision, made somewhere between the depot and his apartment on Meridian Street during the 20-minute drive in his 2009 Ford F-150 that had 212,000 miles on it and a driver's side window that wouldn't go all the way down anymore. He drove through the wet Nashville streets with the radio off. He often drove with the radio off, another habit that Carol had found strange during their marriage and that he'd never been able to adequately explain. And he thought about what had just happened, and he decided not to tell anyone. Not because he thought no one would believe him. People would believe him, mostly. Nashville was a company town in the original sense, a place built around a single industry. And the industry was music. And in music towns, strange encounters happened, and people accepted them as part of the texture of life. His co-worker Darnell Webb had once shared an elevator with Dolly Parton and talked about it with a casual pride that had now been going on for 6 years. His neighbor June Frazier had a story about the time Keith Urban sat at the next table at a diner on Gallatin Avenue and paid for her coffee without being asked. These things happened in Nashville, but those were different. Those were encounters, brushings up against, stories to tell. What had happened tonight felt like something else, something still unformed, still fragile. The way things are before they either become real or disappear. And Danny had learned the hard way that fragile things don't survive being turned into stories too soon. He'd made that mistake before. He'd learned. So he drove home in the rain and the silence and parked in the lot behind his building and sat in the truck for a while longer, listening to the rain on the roof and the distant sound of something. A bar, probably, or a party. Somewhere to the south on Meridian. A thread of music too faint to identify. His apartment was a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building that had been renovated sometime in the early 2000s and had begun quietly unrenovating itself ever since. The 2nd bedroom was technically Reese's room, though she only used it on holidays and the occasional weekend when the dorms felt too small and home felt necessary. He'd kept it set up for her anyway. The same twin bed she'd had since she was 12, the same poster of Casey Musgraves on the wall that she'd put up at 16 and never taken down. A small desk that was usually occupied by whatever textbooks she was between at any given moment. Danny made coffee at 11:15 at night because that was what he did after shifts. His internal clock was permanently inverted from 11 years of evening routes, and sleep before 1 in the morning was essentially theoretical. He stood at the kitchen window with his mug and looked out at the parking lot. The rain still coming down, the sodium light on the lamppost doing its steady orange work on the wet asphalt below. Don't stop singing. He turned it over in his mind the way you turn something over to check all its surfaces. It was a simple sentence, 4 words. It could mean a dozen different things, or it could mean exactly what it sounded like. George Strait had said it with the same tone he'd said everything else. Direct, unambiguous, no particular effort to impress or to be understood as anything other than what he was. It hadn't felt like a platitude. It had felt like an observation from someone who meant it. But then, the other part of Danny's mind, the part that had been in charge for the better part of 2 decades, the part that had learned its lessons and intended to keep applying them, said, he was being kind. That's what people like that do. They're gracious. They say encouraging things to the bus driver who was singing in the dark, and then they get in their SUV and they go home and they don't think about it again, because why would they? Because there are 1,000 people in Nashville who can sing, and 1,000 people who think they're going somewhere with it, and most of them aren't. And you are 44 years old, and you have a mortgage, and a daughter in college, and a job that pays the bills. So, he drank his coffee and went to bed, and lay there for a long time looking at the ceiling. He'd come close once. That was the thing he didn't talk about. The story that existed as a kind of shadow behind all his other stories. The shape in the background that explained everything without being explicitly visible. He'd come close in a way that most people who want to make it in music don't. Not talent show close, not bar gig close, but genuinely, measurably, contractually close. He'd been 31. He'd been playing the Bluebird Cafe circuit for 3 years by then. Not the famous listening room shows, but the earlier slots, the ones that started at 6 and ended at 8, playing originals to tables of people who were there for the dinner as much as the music, but who listened, genuinely listened, sometimes. He had a manager, a man named Ted Hargrove, who worked out of a small office on Music Row, and who had legitimate contacts and a track record that was modest but real. Ted had gotten him a showcase at a label that Danny still couldn't think about without something tightening in his chest. Not a huge label, not one of the big 3, but a real label with real distribution, with A&R people who came to the showcase and took notes on their phones and nodded in a way that was specific and professional and different from the way audiences nodded. The showcase went well. Ted said it went well. The A&R rep, a woman named Christine, who wore expensive boots and asked very precise questions about Danny's writing process, said they'd be in touch within 2 weeks. 6 weeks later, Christine sent an email. The label was restructuring. They were pulling back on new signings across the board. She wished Danny all the best with his career and said that his voice was genuinely special and that she hoped they'd have the opportunity to work together in the future. Danny read the email 3 times. Then he called Ted. Ted said these things happen, said it wasn't a door closing, said there were other labels, said give it some time. 3 months later, Danny's father had the first stroke. Robert Calloway, 63 years old, strong as a fence post his entire life, sitting in his garage in Gallatin with a half-rebuilt carburetor in his hands when his left side simply stopped working. He survived it. He survived 3 more after that, over the course of 18 months, each one taking a little more of the man away. The big hands, the baritone, the particular stillness that Danny had always recognized in himself as inherited. By the time Robert Calloway died, in the spring of Danny's 33rd year, he was a quiet and diminished version of himself. And Danny had been back in Gallatin for most of that 18 months, and the Bluebird slots had lapsed, and Ted Hargrove had moved on to other clients, and the momentum, that specific, fragile, irreplaceable thing, was gone. He'd met Carol 6 months after his father died. She was a dental hygienist from Hendersonville, practical and kind and funny in a dry way that Danny had always found attractive. They got married fast, the way people sometimes do after grief. And Reese arrived 15 months later, and the life assembled itself around Danny the way lives do. Not like a plan executed, but like a river that finds its course, following the available grade, going where it can go. He took the transit authority job when Reese was 2, and the bills were the kind of specific that required a specific kind of response. He told himself, 1 year, maybe 2. 11 years later, he still sang to empty buses at the end of his shift. And he still told himself that this was fine. This was enough. This was the deal he'd made. He was 3 days into not telling anyone when Reese called on a Thursday afternoon. She called on his lunch break, when he was sitting in the driver's break room at the depot with a sandwich he'd made at home that morning and a cup of the depot's coffee. which was the particular kind of terrible that suggested no one involved had any strong feelings about coffee one way or the other. Dad, not a question, not a greeting exactly, just his name in her voice, which was the voice of a 19-year-old woman who had inherited his eyes and Carol's no-nonsense instincts, and the specific combination of the two that produced a person who could tell when something was different without being able to say how she knew. "Hey, Reese, you sound weird. I'm eating a sandwich. You sound weird even for eating a sandwich." He put the sandwich down. "How's school?" "School is fine. Stop deflecting." A brief pause, and then, "Did something happen?" Danny looked at the break room table, which had a ring from someone's coffee cup that had been there for at least a week. He thought about what he'd decided. Not to tell anyone, to keep it fragile, to not turn it into a story before it was anything at all. "Not really," he said. "Long week." Reese made a sound that conveyed complete skepticism with maximum economy. She'd been making that sound since she was about 14. "Okay," she said, in the voice that meant "I don't believe you, but I'm not going to push right now. I was calling because I'm thinking about coming home this weekend. If that's okay?" "It's always okay. I have a songwriting workshop thing Friday night, so I'd come Saturday. Stay Sunday, go back Monday morning. I'll get the good coffee." She laughed. A short, bright sound that did something uncomplicated and good to Danny's chest every single time. "You and your coffee. The regular stuff is fine, Dad." After he hung up, he sat with the rest of his sandwich and thought about Reese at Belmont, in the songwriting workshop, working towards something that he recognized from the inside out. She had his voice. Not the same voice. Hers was a mezzo-soprano with a clarity that his never had. More precise where his was warm. But she had his relationship to music. That same quality of necessity, of this is not optional, that he'd had since childhood, and that he understood in her the way you understand something that is written in a language you were born speaking. She was going somewhere. He was sure of it with the specific certainty of a person who has been in proximity to his own potential and knows what it looks like up close. He was going to make sure she got there, whatever it took. He picked up his sandwich and finished it without tasting it and went back to work. On Friday, his phone rang at a number he didn't recognize. He was between routes, sitting in the cab of the bus at the terminal, filling out a logbook entry with the half-hearted attention that logbooks inspire. He looked at the number, Tennessee area code, but not one he had saved, and answered with the standard caution of a person who has trained himself not to assume. "This Danny Calloway?" The voice on the other end was a man's, businesslike but not unfriendly, with a slight southern inflection. "Speaking. My name's Alan Pierce. I work with George Strait's management team out of San Antonio. A beat. Mr. Strait asked me to contact you." The logbook entry Danny had been writing ended in a line that went sideways across the page. "Okay," Danny said. His voice was very level. He was proud of how level his voice was. "He'd like to meet with you, if you're available, in Nashville. He has some business here next week, Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on your schedule." "I drive a bus route," Danny said. "I can," he calculated, with the automatic mental arithmetic of a man who has organized his life around a schedule for 11 years. "I can be available Tuesday morning. I go in at 2. "Tuesday morning works," Alan Pierce said. "I'll send you the details. Is this number good for a text?" "Yes." "Great. Look for something this afternoon." The call ended. Danny set the phone on the seat beside him and looked through the windshield at the terminal. The concrete pillars, the posted route maps, the other buses in their bays, the entirely ordinary infrastructure of a job that he had been doing for 11 years. His hands, he noticed, were not completely steady. He picked up the logbook, finished the entry with reasonable accuracy, and tried to decide how he felt. What he arrived at was this. He felt the way a man feels when he has been careful not to want something for a long time, and then someone walks up and hands it to him, and he doesn't know yet whether it's real. He sent Reese a text that said, "See you Saturday. I'll have the good coffee." Then he sat with the information by himself for a while longer, the way he'd been doing with it all week, because that was the only way he knew how to hold something fragile. The place Alan Pierce directed him to was not what Danny expected. He'd imagined something corporate. A hotel conference room, maybe, or an office on Music Row with glass walls and the specific kind of tasteful anonymity that the music industry deploys when it wants to seem like it isn't the music industry. What he found instead, at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning in November, was a coffee shop on 12th Avenue South called Fido, that had been an institution in Nashville's 12 South neighborhood for going on 30 years, a place of worn wood and good light and a noise level that was convivial without being hostile. The kind of place that belongs to a neighborhood in the way that certain places belong to neighborhoods, that become part of the identity of a street without quite meaning to. George Strait was already there when Danny arrived, in a corner booth near the back, wearing a denim jacket over a plain gray shirt and the same style of resistol hat. This one a darker shade. There was a coffee in front of him and a second one on the other side of the table. He looked up when Danny came in and raised one hand in acknowledgement. Not a wave exactly, just a gesture that said, "Here, this way." And Danny threaded through the tables with the self-consciousness of a man who is aware that he is wearing his best jeans and a flannel shirt that he'd ironed at 7:30 in the morning, and that this was probably fine. "Danny," George Strait said as Danny slid into the booth. "Good morning," Danny said. They shook hands across the table. A solid, brief handshake, the kind that says, "I am a person who takes this seriously without making anything of it." "Hope you don't mind the coffee," George Strait said, gesturing at the cup across from him. "I didn't know how you took it." "Black is fine," Danny said. "Good." Something that might have been approval, or might have just been the corner of a smile. "I hate the other stuff. Too much going on." For a moment they sat with the easy silence of men who have no particular need to fill it. Around them, Fido went about its morning business. The hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of a dozen conversations, someone at the counter laughing at something the barista said. Outside, 12th Avenue South in the November morning sun. Coffee shops and boutiques and a bookstore. The kind of street that Nashville had been building toward for 20 years. The city in its current phase, prosperous and self-aware. "I want to ask you something," George Strait said. "And I'd like a straight answer." "All right," Danny said. "That night on the bus, that wasn't for anyone. No one knew I was there. You didn't know I was there." A pause. "So, that's just you. That's just what you sound like when there's no reason to perform." He looked at Danny with the directness that Danny remembered from the back of the bus, that frank and level gaze. "How long has it been since you sang for a room?" Danny thought about it honestly. "A long time," he said. "More than 10 years." "Why?" The question was simple and direct, and landed harder than it probably looked from the outside. Danny wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at it for a moment. "Life got complicated," he said. "My dad got sick. I had a daughter to raise. The timing went wrong." "The timing went wrong," George Strait repeated. Not mockingly, just noting it. "And I was 33, Danny said. 33 in this business is... I had my first major single at 30, George Strait said. Danny looked up. "I know that's not the point you're making," the older man said. "And I know the business is different now than it was then. But I want you to understand that I'm not sitting here being naive about how any of this works." He picked up his coffee, drank, set it down. I'm sitting here because I've been in this business for 40 years, and I know what a voice is, and I know what a singer is, and they're not always the same thing. You understand what I mean? Danny understood. A voice was a physical instrument. Range, tone, control. A singer was something harder to define. Something that had to do with truth and with need, with the specific quality of a person's relationship to the music they made. There were people with extraordinary voices who were not, in that deeper sense, singers. And there were singers, real ones, whose technical gifts were secondary to something else, something harder to name and impossible to manufacture. I think so, Danny said. You're a singer, George Strait said, simply, without ornamentation. You were singing in an empty bus at night because you couldn't not. That's what I'm talking about. Danny said nothing. His jaw was tight. I've been talking to some people, the older man continued. I have a friend, Jay Whitfield. He produces out of a studio on Edge Hill, who owes me about 6 favors and has better ears than most people in this city. I'd like you to go into the studio with him. Not an audition, not a showcase. Just go in, sing some things, see what's there. Danny set the coffee cup down. Mr. Strait, George. The name felt strange in his mouth. Too familiar and not familiar enough simultaneously. I appreciate what you're doing. I genuinely do. But I need to be honest with you. He paused, organizing the words. I'm 44 years old. I have a daughter in college. I have a job and a mortgage. Whatever window there was for the kind of thing you're describing, I think it closed a while ago. George Strait was quiet for a moment. He looked at Danny with an expression that wasn't pity, and wasn't impatience, and wasn't the polite neutrality of a man waiting for someone to finish making a wrong argument. It was something more like recognition, the look of someone who has heard this specific thing before, who knows its shape. Let me tell you something, he said. I've watched a lot of talented people talk themselves out of things, give me very good reasons why it won't work, and sometimes they're right. Sometimes it doesn't work. This business is hard, and it's not fair, and good people get the wrong end of it all the time. He leaned forward slightly. But the thing I notice is that the reasons are almost always about protecting themselves from one specific thing. You know what that thing is? Danny waited. Trying again and having it not work, George Strait said. Because the first time it doesn't work, you can tell yourself it was the timing. It was circumstance. Your dad got sick. That's all true. But if you try again, if you really try, and it still doesn't work, then the story changes. And that's harder to carry. The noise of the coffee shop continued around them. The espresso machine, the conversations, the morning light through the windows going gold on the worn wood tables. Danny looked at the man across from him and understood that he was right with a completeness that was not comfortable. Jay Whitfield, he said finally. What would that involve? He got home at noon and sat at his kitchen table with a notepad. An actual paper notepad. One of the legal pads he kept in a kitchen drawer for reasons he couldn't have explained since the main thing he wrote on them was grocery lists. And he wrote down everything he remembered from the conversation. Not notes exactly, more like a transcript of his own thoughts. The kind of writing you do when you need to see something outside of your own head, to know what you actually think about it. At the bottom of the page, after a long time, he wrote 2 words. What if? He stared at those 2 words for a while. Then he wrote, below them, what if it works? And below that, what if it doesn't? He looked at the 2 possibilities side by side. He thought about what his life would look like from the outside if he said no. The bus, the depot, the route, the singing in the empty cab at the end of the shift, the coffee after midnight, Reese's tuition covered every semester for the next 2 years, and then it was her problem. Retirement in 20-some years. The steady and manageable and completely sufficient architecture of a life he had built to not fall apart. He thought about what his life would look like if he said yes and it didn't work. Largely the same, minus the specific protection of never having tried, but plus what? The knowledge that he had. Something his father, who had worked on engines his whole life, and who had said exactly once to his son, "You have a gift," might have understood. He thought about what his life would look like if he said yes, and it did work. And that was a thought he couldn't quite hold still long enough to examine, because something in him deflected it, the way the eye deflects bright light. He called the number Alan Pierce had texted him and left a message saying he was interested in meeting Jay Whitfield, and he'd be available Tuesday morning through Friday morning of the following week. And he hoped that worked for everyone. Thank you. Then he went and had a shower and got ready for his shift. Reese arrived Saturday morning with a duffel bag and a messenger bag full of notebooks and the slightly distracted energy of a person whose mind is still partly somewhere else. She was tall. She'd gotten Carol's height, a full 2 inches above Danny, with Danny's eyes and a mass of dark hair that she kept tied back when she was working and let down when she wasn't. And she walked into the apartment and dropped her bags in the hallway and went directly to the kitchen and poured herself coffee before she'd said more than hello. She settled at the kitchen table with the coffee, pulled one knee up, and looked at him. "Okay," she said. "What is it?" "Good morning to you, too, Dad." Danny sat across from her and looked at his daughter, who had his eyes and his mother's directness, and who had, from a very young age, been essentially impossible to successfully mislead. He thought about what he'd decided about keeping it fragile. He thought about the legal pad, still on the table, though he'd folded it to hide the 2 words and everything below them. He told her. He told her the whole thing, the empty bus, the singing, looking up in the mirror, the conversation at the depot steps, the card, the call from Alan Pierce, the coffee shop, George Strait across the booth saying "You're a singer" in the tone of a man stating a fact, Jay Whitfield, his own phone call agreeing to meet. When he finished, Reese sat very still for a moment, with her coffee cup in both hands, the same way Danny held coffee when he was thinking. He noticed the gesture, and it caught him somewhere in the chest. "Dad," she said. Her voice was careful, measured, the way it got when she was working out how to say something that mattered. "Why are you telling me like something bad happened?" He blinked. "I'm not." "You are. You're telling me this like it's a problem." She set the cup down. "George Strait heard you sing. Thinks you're worth listening to. Connected you with a producer. And you're," she gestured at him, "sitting there like you're waiting for me to talk you out of it." Danny opened his mouth and closed it. "I know what happened with the label," Reese said. Her voice was quieter now. "Mom told me years ago, and I know about Grandpa. And I know you think," she stopped, reassembled. "I know you think that the timing has just permanently been wrong, and that's the story. But what if it's not? Too?" She looked at him with an expression that was direct and a little fierce and achingly familiar. "What if this is the timing that's right?" Danny looked at his daughter across the kitchen table in the Saturday morning light, the Nashville November sun coming in through the window over the sink and making the room warm and specific. He thought about a boy in the back of a pickup truck, singing at the top of his lungs on the way to church in Gallatin, 30 miles northeast of here. A voice already too big for its body. "I called Alan Pierce," he said. "Left a message. I'm going to meet with the producer." Reese's expression shifted. The fierce look softened into something that was relief and satisfaction, and something else, something that was pride, but in the particular direction of a child who is proud of a parent. which is its own specific thing. "Good," she said. She picked up her coffee. "Now, what are we having for breakfast?" Jay Whitfield's studio was a converted house on Edge Hill Avenue, which was one of those Nashville streets that existed in the overlap between residential and commercial, between the city's past and its present. Bungalows and small businesses and recording studios that had been recording studios for so long, they'd become part of the neighborhood's identity. The house was white, or had been white at some point, with a covered porch and a hand-lettered sign that said Edge Hill Sound in letters that had faded to a comfortable understatement. Danny stood on the sidewalk in front of it on a Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock and felt the particular variety of fear that is not quite stage fright and not quite dread, but something in between. The fear of the thing you have wanted, that you are now about to actually face. He went inside. Jay Whitfield was a lean, quiet man in his mid-50s with wire-rimmed glasses and silver-streaked hair and the hands of someone who spent a lot of time at a keyboard. Long fingers, deliberate movements. He met Danny at the door with a handshake and a directness that reminded Danny of George Strait's directness. And he suspected they had this in common from decades of working together. This quality of not wasting words or time on things that didn't matter. "George told me about you," Jay said, walking Danny through the front room, which was a kind of comfortable lounge, couches and coffee table, and bookshelves full of CDs and vinyl, and what looked like decades' worth of music industry trade publication. Toward the back of the house and the studio proper. "He said you were the real thing." That's George's exact phrase, by the way. He doesn't say it often. "No pressure," Danny said. Jay glanced at him, registered the dry humor, and something in his face relaxed slightly. "No pressure at all. We're just going to talk and sing some today. No decisions, no obligations. I just want to hear what's in there." The recording room was smaller than Danny expected. Intimate, which was the right word for it. A room that was sized for a specific kind of honesty. A Yamaha grand piano against the far wall. A vocal booth with a glass partition. Speakers mounted in the corners. The console in an adjacent room visible through another glass partition. The smell of the place was specific. Cable insulation and wood, and the slight coolness of climate control, and something else, harder to name. The smell of accumulated music, of notes played and sung in this room over years and years. "What do you want to sing?" Jay asked. Danny had thought about this. He'd thought about it on the bus Tuesday and Wednesday, going over the options with the particular thoroughness that anxiety inspires. He'd considered a list of country standards, the songs that showed off range and control, the obvious audition choices. He'd considered his own songs. He still wrote sometimes, had a drawer full of notebooks with half-finished things, and a few things that were fully finished and had never been played for anyone. He'd gone back and forth. What he'd arrived at was simple. The same thing he'd been doing the night all of this started. George Strait, he said. A few of them, if that's not... Jay's expression was unreadable. That's not weird at all. Let's start wherever you want. They started with Carrying Your Love With Me. Danny stood at the microphone in the vocal booth with his eyes closed and his hands loose at his sides, and he sang it the way he sang things when no one was supposed to be listening. Because that was the whole lesson of the last 2 weeks. That was the thing George Strait had said across the booth at Fido. That's just you. That's just what you sound like when there's no reason to perform. So he tried to not perform. He tried to just sing. The booth was acoustically clean, and the microphone was very good. And when he opened his eyes after the first chorus, he could see Jay Whitfield on the other side of the glass, very still, watching him with an expression that gave nothing away. He finished the song. Jay's voice came through the monitor. Again, same song. Don't think. Danny sang it again. After the second run-through, Jay came into the booth. He adjusted the microphone stand by about a quarter inch, a gesture that was more ritual than functional, Danny suspected. "You're slightly in your head on the bridge," Jay said. "Not bad, just there's a moment where I can hear you listening to yourself. Let's do Run and see if it's the song or the habit." Danny looked at him. "George mentioned it," Jay said simply. "Said it was what you were singing when he heard you." "Let's hear it." He sang Run. He got about 8 bars in and something happened. The thing that sometimes happened when he was on the bus at the end of a shift. That evacuation of everything except the song. The booth fell away, the glass partition fell away, Jay Whitfield fell away. There was just the melody and the words and the particular ache of the thing, the urgency of a narrator begging someone to choose life, to run toward something. He felt it in the way he always felt it. In the chest first, and then in the throat. A full-body thing. He didn't remember finishing it. He came back to awareness standing in the booth with his eyes wet, which was embarrassing, and Jay Whitfield on the other side of the glass with his elbows on the console and his chin in his hands, completely still. A long moment passed. Jay pressed the talkback button. "Play that back," he said, not to Danny, but to the engineer Danny had barely registered, a young woman named Cassie, who had been running the session from a laptop at the corner of the console. They listened to it back in the control room. Danny and Jay and Cassie, standing at the console listening to Danny's voice come out of the monitors. And it was the strangest thing Danny had experienced in a long time. Hearing himself that way, through the equipment, with the room stripped away. He sounded like someone else, the way your voice sounds different on a recording. But also, he sounded like himself, more purely himself than he usually felt. And he stood there and listened to his own voice sing and didn't know what to do with what he was feeling. When it ended, Jay was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You wrote anything? Original stuff?" Danny hesitated. "Some. Bring it Thursday. All of it. Finished or not. We're going to be here for a while." He called George Strait's management that evening, Alan Pierce, efficient and calm as always, and asked if it would be possible to pass a message to George. Alan said he'd do his best. Danny said, "Tell him thank you. Just that. He'll know what it means." Then he went to the kitchen drawer and got out the notebooks. There were 7 of them, going back about 8 years, filled with the particular handwriting of someone who writes quickly and without particular concern for legibility, song fragments and chord notations and complete verses and abandoned bridges and titles without songs and songs without titles. Some of them were unambiguously bad, the self-conscious kind of bad that comes from trying too hard. Some of them were better than he'd remembered. A few of them, 3, maybe 4, were the real thing, he thought, though he didn't entirely trust his own judgment on that. He stayed up until 2 in the morning going through them, the way you go through a drawer that you haven't opened in a long time, finding things you forgot you'd kept. Thursday at Edge Hill was different from Wednesday. Wednesday had been about capability, about what Danny could do with someone else's songs, what he sounded like under controlled conditions, how much of the rawness of the bus survived the translation to a studio. Thursday was about something harder and more specific, which was what Danny Calloway had to say that was his and no one else's. He'd brought the notebooks. He'd also brought, on his phone, in a voice memo app, a recording he'd made the previous night, sitting in his kitchen at midnight, of a song called "The Long Way." He'd written it 3 years ago in about 45 minutes, which was how he'd written most of the things he thought were actually good. Quickly, without trying. The way the best things come. It was a song about his father, about Gallatin and the garage, and the carburetor, and the hands. About the specific grief of watching someone become less than they were, and about the specific love that coexists with that grief and somehow makes it bearable. He'd never played it for anyone. He played it for Jay Whitfield at 10:45 on a Thursday morning, standing in the vocal booth with his hands at his sides and his eyes on the middle distance. And when he finished the last verse, he was aware that he had been crying somewhere in the second chorus. Not dramatically, just the quiet leaking that sometimes happens when you get too close to a true thing. Jay didn't say anything for a while. Then, "Where have you been keeping that?" "A notebook." "For how long?" 3 years. Jay took his glasses off and cleaned them on his shirt, which was what he did, Danny had noticed, when he was thinking hard. He put them back on. "I want to do something. I want to call a session for Tuesday. Full band, a couple of harmony singers. I want to do The Long Way, and 2 more of yours. And I want to do Run as a closer. And I want George on the phone during playback." He looked at Danny steadily. "Is that okay with you?" Danny's immediate response was no. Not as a word, just as a physical sensation, a tightening across the chest, a pulling back, the fear of the thing you've wanted that you are now actually facing. He looked at Jay Whitfield and thought about Reese at the kitchen table. What if this is the timing that's right? He thought about his father's hands, rough and sure, under the hood of an engine. "Tuesday works," he said. "I go in at 2. He didn't tell anyone about Tuesday, except Reese. He called her Saturday and told her without preamble, the same way he'd told her about the bus. And she was quiet for a moment on the other end, and then said, very carefully, "Dad, are you okay?" "I think so," he said. "Yeah, okay." A pause. "I'm proud of you." He didn't answer right away. Outside his apartment window, Nashville was doing its Saturday afternoon thing. The sound of it, the particular hum of a city that runs on music even when no specific music is playing. A background frequency that you only notice when you stop and listen for it. "Thank you, Reese," he said. Sunday, he went to church. He hadn't gone in years, not since his father died, really, which was when the habit had broken, and he'd never fully rebuilt it. But he drove out to Gallatin on a Sunday morning in November, the sky low and white, the highway through the suburbs, and then into the older landscape of Middle Tennessee, the farms and the tree lines, and the occasional water tower with a town name on it. He went to First Baptist. He sat in a pew near the back. The choirs sang and he listened, and at the end of the service, he sat alone in the nearly empty church for a while. The old wood and the colored light through the windows, the particular quiet of a place that has absorbed decades of people's most serious feelings. He thought about his father. He thought, "I'm going to try. I know you'd want me to." The church was empty by the time he left. Outside, Gallatin in November, the town his father had lived and worked and died in, the town he'd grown up in and left, and periodically returned to, the town that still felt more like home than anywhere else in a way he couldn't entirely explain. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for a few minutes with the engine off. Then he started the truck and drove back to Nashville. Tuesday came with the cold clarity of a late November morning, the sky a bright and unambiguous blue, the kind of sky that Nashville sometimes produces in November as if in compensation for the gray weeks that surround it. Danny drove to Edge Hill Sound at 8:30 with a thermos of coffee and the 7 notebooks in a canvas bag on the passenger seat, and he sat in the truck in front of the studio for approximately 4 minutes before going inside. Jay Whitfield met him at the door, looking more energized than Danny had seen him. There was something in his bearing that was different from the deliberate calm of the previous 2 sessions, a quality of focused anticipation. "Band's setting up," he said. "Coffee's inside." George is going to call in around 11 for playback. We have the morning. The band was 3 people. A guitarist named Frank Ostrowski, who was somewhere in his 40s and had the quiet confidence of someone who has played on more sessions than he could count. A bassist named Terry Bouchard, compact and focused, with an economy of movement that suggested deep professionalism. And a drummer named Pete Solano, who set up with a quick, practiced efficiency and then sat behind his kit and waited with the patience of someone who has spent a career waiting for the room to be ready. Danny shook hands with all 3 and felt the mild unreality of the morning. These were session musicians, real ones, the people who had played on hundreds of Nashville recordings, and they were here to play behind him, which was a sentence that his brain was still working on accepting. They ran through the long way twice without recording, just finding the shape of it. Jay had written out a chord chart from the voice memo Danny had sent him, and Frank Ostrowski played the intro the first time and looked up at Danny with an expression that said, "I see it in the wordless language of musicians recognizing a good song." By the second run-through, Terry Bouchard and Pete Solano had found their parts with the natural ease of people who play well. "We record the 3rd time," Jay said from the control room. The 3rd time was the one they kept. Danny knew it while it was happening. There is a quality to certain moments in a recording session, a rightness of fit between the performers and the song and the room and the time, that is unmistakable when it's there and impossible to manufacture when it isn't. He felt it in the way the band responded to him, in the way Frank Ostrowski's guitar found the space around Danny's voice and filled it without crowding, in the way Terry Bouchard's bass line was exactly as unhurried as the song required. He felt it most in his own chest, in the way the second verse opened up and the grief in it became available in the way that grief sometimes becomes available when the conditions are exactly right. Not raw, not sentimental, but true, which is the only thing a song about a real person needs to be. He closed his eyes for the last chorus and sang to his father. When it ended, the room was very quiet. Pete Solano set down his sticks on his snare and said quietly, to no one in particular, "Man." Jay Whitfield's voice on the monitor, "One more time for safety, then we move." They didn't need the safety take, but they did it, and it was nearly as good. And then they moved to the second song, a thing Danny had called Meridian Street, after his street, after the walk home from the bus stop at midnight, after the particular quality of a life that is not what you planned and yet is unambiguously yours. It was a quieter song, more interior, without the narrative drive of the long way, and it took 2 attempts before it found its shape. The 3rd take was good. The 4th was better. Jay called it On the 4th. The 3rd song was one Danny hadn't titled yet. He thought of it as The Callaway Boy, in the privacy of his own mind, though he hadn't written that on anything. It was the song about the label showcase and the email from Christine, and the 18 months in Gallatin watching his father disappear, and the specific arithmetic of arriving at 44 with a life that was smaller than the one you'd imagined. It was the most personal song he had, the one that had cost him the most to write, and that he'd been most reluctant to play for anyone. He played it for Jay and Frank Ostrowski, and Terry Bouchard, and Pete Solano. And he didn't close his eyes this time. He sang it with his eyes open and his hands at his sides, because the privacy of it was part of what it cost, and he wanted to pay the full cost. Jay stopped them after the first take, not because it was bad. He came into the room and stood for a moment, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, and then he said, "Do you know what that song is?" Danny waited. "That song is the reason everything else is worth doing," Jay said. "That song is why." He looked at Danny over the wire-rimmed glasses. "Sing it once more. Same everything. Don't think. Just give it all of it. Danny sang it once more. He gave it all of it. When they broke at 10:45 for coffee, Frank Ostrowski found Danny in the kitchen and said, in the undemonstrative way of a man who works with words every day and has learned to choose them carefully, "I've played a lot of sessions. That was a real one." He poured his coffee and went back to the studio without saying anything else, which was exactly right. At 11 o'clock, Jay set up the call on a speaker in the control room. Alan Pierce connected them first, and then George Strait's voice came through the speaker, clear and even, the South Texas accent unhurried and familiar. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Jay said. Danny said the same. "Let me hear it," George said. Jay played "The Long Way" first. In the control room, Danny stood against the back wall and listened to his own voice come out of the monitors. The voice he'd been carrying around for 44 years, the voice from his father's truck and First Baptist and the Bluebird Cafe and 11 years of empty buses. The voice that had been singing in the dark for so long it had almost forgotten what the light felt like. It sounded real. It sounded like someone who meant it. The song ended. A pause on the line. George Strait said, "Play the next one." They played Meridian Street. And then The Callaway Boy. And then, at the end, Run, Danny's version, recorded after the originals, with Frank Ostrowski's guitar doing something in the bridge that was simple and devastating and made the song his in a way that still startled Danny every time he heard it. After Run, the line was quiet for a long moment. Then George Strait said, "Jay." "I know," Jay said. "Play it for whomever you need to play it for," George said. "Today." Jay said, "That was already the plan." Another pause. Then George's voice. "Danny." "Yes, sir." "You remember what I said at the depot?" Danny did. He'd been remembering it for 2 weeks. "Yes. I said, don't stop singing," George Strait said. "I want you to change that now. Don't just not stop. Start." Danny stood in the control room of Edge Hill Sound at 11:17 in the morning in November and heard those words come out of a speaker, and something in his chest that had been held very still for a very long time moved. "Okay," he said. His voice was level. He was proud of how level his voice was. "Good," George said. "Jay's got the rest. He knows what to do." A brief pause, and then in a tone that was quieter, more direct. The tone of a man speaking past the professional and into the personal. "Your father would have gotten a kick out of this." Danny didn't answer immediately. He looked at the monitors, the console, Jay Whitfield's hands on the faders, the room that had just held 4 musicians and 4 songs, and whatever it is that happens in a space when people make something real together. "Yes, sir," he said. He would have. The call ended. Jay turned in his chair and looked at Danny. "We're going to send this to 3 people this afternoon," he said. "Labels, the right size, not the biggest, the right ones. And we're going to do a small show. Not a showcase, not an audition. A show. The Bluebird Listening Room, 3 weeks out. 40 people. You play these 4 songs in order, the way we just played them back." He looked at Danny steadily. "You've been off stages for over a decade. The show isn't for the labels. The show is for you. So you know you can do it again." Danny nodded. "The labels are for afterward," Jay said, "if you want them to be." The Bluebird Cafe on a December Tuesday. A listening room show in the round format that the Bluebird had made famous. 4 songwriters facing each other in the center of the room, taking turns. Jay had quietly arranged it so that Danny had the last slot, closing the night. 40 seats. Full. The room that had launched more careers in Nashville than possibly any other room its size in the world. the small, unassuming place on Hillsborough Pike, where the music had always been the only thing that mattered. Danny arrived at 6:30 for sound check. He stood in the center of the room with a microphone and a guitar, an acoustic, a Martin D28 that had been his father's, one of the few things of Robert Calloway's that Danny had kept. The guitar sitting in the corner of his bedroom for 11 years, being carefully not played. And he played the opening chord of The Long Way into the empty room. The room was good. The room was the best kind of good. The quiet, focused, reverential good of a place that has been dedicated to a single thing for a long time and carries that dedication in its walls. He finished the sound check and sat at the bar for a while, drinking water. The other three songwriters, two women and a man, all younger than him, all clearly regular at this circuit, came and went. One of them, a woman named Beth Alderson, with a banjo and sharp, intelligent eyes, stopped and looked at him. "First time here?" she asked. "First time in a while," he said. She nodded, with the simple understanding of someone who has been away from things and come back. "It's a good room," she said. "Tell the truth, and it'll take care of you." She went to the back to tune up, and Danny sat with his water and thought about telling the truth, which was the only thing he'd ever known how to do when the conditions were right. Reese arrived at 7:15 with Carol. He hadn't known Carol was coming. Reese had apparently handled that on her own, a decision she'd made and executed without consulting him. And when he saw them come in together, Reese, tall and dark-haired, Carol slightly shorter, with the same practical bearing she'd always had, both of them in winter coats, Reese scanning the room and Carol looking around with an expression he couldn't quite read. He felt something complicated move through him. Carol found him at the bar and came over. They looked at each other for a moment. 10 years since the divorce, 9 years of the particular navigation of two people who share a daughter and a history and have found their way to a version of civil that has almost become warm. She looked good. She looked, he thought, like herself, like the person she'd always been before the marriage became a place of attrition. "Reese told me," Carol said. "I hope it's okay that I'm here." "It's okay," Danny said. And it was. "George Strait," she said, with a tone that was dry and wondering and not entirely unlike Reese's tone on the same subject. "George Strait," he confirmed. She shook her head slightly. "Life," she said. He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from the chest. "That's what I said." Reese materialized at his elbow, looked between the two of them with the calibrated attention of a person who has spent her whole life reading the emotional temperature of her parents' interactions, and apparently found whatever she found satisfactory. Because she relaxed slightly and said, "You ready?" "No," Danny said, "but I'm doing it anyway." Reese put one hand briefly on his arm, one quick, firm pressure, the gesture of a person who means it. And then she and Carol went to find their seats. The show started at 8. Beth Alderson opened with the banjo and 3 songs that were genuinely wonderful, specific and true. Songs about a place in East Tennessee she was from that made Danny feel the landscape of them. The second songwriter, a young man named Cole Barrett, played a gorgeous instrumental finger-picking piece. And then 2 songs about being away from home that were technically accomplished and emotionally real. The third, a woman named Diane Howell, who had the kind of voice that suggests decades of learning, played 4 songs that built from quiet to something like a full statement. And then it was Danny's turn. He moved to the center. He adjusted the microphone. He set the Martin in his lap and felt the weight of it. His father's guitar, older than his daughter, older than his marriage, older than his job, older than the failed showcase, and the email from Christine, and the 11 years of empty bus routes at midnight. The guitar his father had played at First Baptist in Gallatin. The guitar that had been in the corner of his bedroom for 11 years, carefully not played. He looked out at the room. 40 people. J. Whitfield in the back. 3 faces from labels who had been sent the recordings and asked to be here tonight. Beth Alderson and Cole Barrett and Diane Howell arranged around the circle, listening. And in the front section, 2 women in winter coats. One tall and dark-haired, 19 years old with his eyes. One slightly shorter, practical and attentive, watching him with an intensity that was specific and complete. He played the opening chord of The Long Way. The room went the way a good room goes when the right thing is happening in it. Not silent exactly, but stilled, with the particular quality of collective attention that is rare and unmistakable. He felt it as he began to sing, the room listening in the way the room at Edgehill had listened, in the way the empty bus had listened for 11 years, in the way his father's garage in Gallatin had listened when Danny was 8 years old and already too big for his own voice. He played all 4 songs in order: The Long Way and Meridian Street and The Callaway Boy and Run. He told the truth, and the room took care of him. Afterward, in the particular suspended atmosphere of a room after music, people talking quietly, the emotional residue of the evening still in the air, J. Whitfield found him at the side of the room and said, without preamble, 2 of the 3 are interested. Real interest. I'll have calls set up this week. Danny nodded. It's not a done deal, Jay said. I want to be straight with you. These things take time, and they don't always close the way you want. But the interest is real, and the music is real. And those 2 things in the same sentence at the same time is not nothing. I know, Danny said. You did good tonight, Jay said. It was said in the tone of a man who doesn't compliment things unless he means it. Danny shook his hand. He found Reese and Carol by the front door, coats back on, waiting. Reese hugged him first, a full, genuine hug, the kind she'd been giving him since she was small. Arms all the way around, no half measures. He held on for a moment. When she stepped back, Carol looked at him. The expression he couldn't read when they'd come in had resolved into something clearer now. Something that was, he thought, genuine happiness for him. The uncomplicated kind that can sometimes survive the end of complicated things. You were really good, Danny, she said. Thank you for coming, he said. They stood for a moment in the doorway of the Bluebird. The December Nashville night outside. Cold and clear. The sky the kind of black that happens between the lights of a city and the beginning of actual darkness, somewhere in that margin. He could hear, faintly, from somewhere on Hillsborough Pike, the sound of another venue, another band, the steady ambient music of a city that doesn't stop. Dad? Reese said. Yeah. What are you going to do about the bus? He thought about Route 12, the depot at midnight, the vinyl seats and the diesel smell and the fluorescent hum and the long empty stretches of Nashville Road at the end of a shift. 11 years of it. The woman in scrubs named Patricia, and the retired postman named Gerald, and the tourists and the regulars, and the way the city looked through those windows in the rain. The neon on the wet glass, like something beautiful that nobody had intended. He thought about a man sitting in the last row with his hat pulled down. A man who had needed to be somewhere in between, who had sat in the dark and listened. I don't know yet, Danny said honestly, but whatever I do, it was a good place to be. He pulled his coat on and walked out into the Nashville night with his daughter on one side and his father's guitar on his back, and the sound of the city around him, which was the sound of people trying, which was the only sound that had ever really mattered to him, and which, for the first time in a long time, included his own. 3 months later, Danny Calloway signed a development deal with a mid-sized Nashville label. The Long Way was released as a single in the spring. George Strait heard it on the radio driving through South Texas and called Jay Whitfield to say exactly 2 words. "Told you." Jay played the voicemail for Danny, who listened to it twice and didn't say anything, and then drove home and had coffee in his kitchen at midnight and sat at the window and looked out at the parking lot on Meridian Street. The sodium lamp on the wet asphalt, the city doing what it does. He had given his notice at the transit authority the week before. Route 12 now had a different driver. Danny hoped, for the remaining passengers, that the new driver was someone who understood what the last stretch before the depot was for. He suspected they might not. He sang anyway.